Good morning. Good morning. I just asked Rabbi if I could just take a minute. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Frank Jacobson, and my wife Stephanie and I have had the privilege, and I really do say a privilege, of chairing the Scholar in Residence Weekend. I want to take a moment, first of all, to recognize the committee, and if you are a committee member, would you stand up, please, so that we can... Stephanie and I, first of all, want to just say thank you. This has been an incredible... I know there's more than Hannah that's in here that's a committee member. I know it's hard to stand up and sit, but you did. This was the first real committee activity Stephanie and I have had at Chadash. We've been members here now, I guess, 3+ years. And I have to say what an extraordinary experience it is working as volunteers in this community. Many of you know I work professionally in the community, in the Jewish community. But this, as a volunteer, I want to say thank you to the other volunteers and to the donors, all of you in this room who've made contributions to support this event. When Rabbi Micah asked if we would chair it, we actually didn't take very long to say yes, because we knew, Stephanie's known of Rabbi Artson for many, many years. And to have somebody like Rabbi Artson, to have Rabbi Artson in our community was a real privilege for us. So we jumped at the chance to be able to do this. I hope those of you that have been with us for the whole weekend have enjoyed it. We've enjoyed just being here with you and with Rabbi Artson. I just want to say thank you to the congregation for all that you have done to help us to make this thing happen, and for the gorgeous gift that you gave us yesterday. Thank you very much.
It's always nice to be a rabbi to congregants like Stephanie and Frank, who in my childhood knew me. They always say that I was this tall. And I asked my parents, was I ever that tall? They said, yes, we just fed you Miracle Grow, and that's what happened. So before we begin the program formally, I just want to recognize a couple of my colleagues who are here. I just want to recognize Rabbi Meir and Laura Goldstein, who are in the back. Baruchim Habayim. Rabbi Meir Goldstein is the campus rabbi and director of all of the Jewish life that goes on campus at Pardes. And we both went to Ziegler together. So welcome, Rabbi Goldstein and Laura. And I have the opportunity to teach for Rabbi Goldstein. People in my congregation, I teach 6th grade there, the Judaic Studies, and I really value our friendship, and it's wonderful to learn with you and from you. So thank you. We are also blessed in our community. When Rabbi Kleinberg started Valley Beit Midrash, he and I had a friendship that goes way back, and for that I will always be grateful, both to he and Deborah. And recently, in the last year, we've welcomed 2 amazing people and their daughter. And Shoshana and Rabbi Shmuel Yanklowitz have assumed the torch, so to speak. We're in the Olympic season. So they've taken on the torch of Valley Beit Midrash, and I am so humbled and honored to share time with Rabbi Yanklowitz. He's been here for panel discussions and opportunities, and they are helping to sponsor this morning. And so I just want to send love to Rabbi Shmuley, and I want him to come forward to share a few words this morning. Please, b'vakasha. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really such an honor and privilege to be a part of this weekend. I've never directly learned from Rabbi Artson, only indirectly in countless ways, and there's been a unanimous consensus. It's been a remarkable success this weekend. Yes, please. So many hearts and minds and souls opened in profound ways, and that's really what we're here to do on this world, I believe. And it's a great honor to be a part of this morning, and with Or Chadash, this wonderful, very special congregation and great spiritual leader, Rabbi Micah Kaplan, who has become a colleague and a friend and an inspiration to me. I moved here about 7 months ago. My wife is from New York, I'm from Chicago, and we heard about this wonderful opportunity. and have been just thrilled with the potential here and the actualization here in the greater Phoenix community of building a broad, pluralistic community for Jewish learning and for innovation. And if you haven't seen one of our packets, there's a stack back there. If you're not on our listserv, there's a sign-up sheet back there. I just want to highlight a couple things coming up. This Tuesday night, we have a rabbinic panel for rabbis who are discussing the issue of the Jewish relationships to other religions. Should be a fascinating night if you're free this Tuesday. And this Wednesday night, I'm starting a new class series on our global Jewish responsibilities to Jews and to non-Jews, how to juggle all these commitments. Our next co-sponsorship with Or Chadash is when Rabbi Sharon Brous is coming out, also from Los Angeles. That actually, it says in here it's happening here, but it's actually going to happen at the JCA, at the campus over there. So if you want to sign up for that, we're taking registration now. The other thing that's not in this packet is Rabbi Dov Littman in the Knesset in Israel is going to, we just confirmed, is going to come out and speak for us this May. He's the first American-born member of Knesset since Mayor Kahana, I guess a couple of decades ago. Kind of an interesting stat, but he's a very interesting. He's a very interesting thinker who's working on pluralistic issues in a unique way in Israel. A lot more going on in this packet. You didn't come to hear me this morning, so I'm going to pause here. And I just want to say, if I haven't met you, please do come over after. I'd love to just get to know you. We're excited to be a part of this community, both of Or Chadash, the greater Phoenix Jewish community, and look forward to learning with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Shmuel Yanklowitz, and we look forward to our next co-sponsorship with my colleague Rabbi Brous and all of the other opportunities with Valley Beit Midrash. Or Chadash is a very proud congregational sponsor of the program, and we look forward to many years to come, so thank you. Before Rabbi Artson gives his formal talk this morning, what will happen is, the theme is the Torah of social justice. He's going to share on a half an hour, and then there'll be around 15 minutes or so for some questions and answers. Following that, we'll have an opportunity, if you have purchased a book, for that matter, Rabbi Artson has graciously agreed to signing and autographing and meeting everybody. We do have to have him on a plane at a certain point, but I think we'll have enough time for everyone to have the opportunity to share. I do have a couple gifts, though, for Rabbi Artson from our congregation, so Brad, if you'll come forward. So, not my Miami community, but somewhere in Florida told me on Facebook that you love chocolate. And so, there's a little sweetness here. There are 2 tablets of the covenant, although Mel Brooks might disagree in his movie. There might be 3. There might be the iPad version these days. But nevertheless, to parallel the tablets of the covenant to get you safely home on your American Airlines flight, we have 2 delicious Hershey chocolate bars for you. So that's number 1. I'm not going to tell you who told me. They said get him Hershey chocolate bars. That's what he likes. So the other gift is from our congregation. So we have been very blessed to have Rabbi Nate Crane as our rabbinic intern here for the last year and a half. I will have the privilege of joining you at the ordination ceremony, presenting him to you to be rabbi in May, on May 19th, I believe, on Monday evening. And we are also privileged to have Frank and Stephanie Jacobson's daughter, Aviva Funk, learning with you at the Ziegler School. And we have many connections, Rabbi Goldstein, our community, and myself, Rabbi Tracy Rosen. There are a number of us that are in this community. And so, if you remember, I asked Rabbi Crane, perhaps, to send a Megillah to the school for Purim. And I decided not to send him back with the Megillah, but I asked his permission if we could wait until your arrival. So, we have a Megillah Esther. The case is a little bit older. The Megillah is older. But we want you to take this to the Ziegler School. And we hope that you'll use it for Purim. It's a kosher Megillah. There's a little bit of the parchment that will probably have to be fixed a little bit. But it's perfectly kosher. We hope that you'll use it. And that it's a gift from Congregation Or Chadash. So thank you so much. So, for those of you who did not have the opportunity to hear my introductions about Rabbi Artson, I think we have covered everything from he brings music like birds to community here at Or Chadash, to he shares his vision of Torah That's an inside joke for those of us that were here Shabbat morning at the JCC. To being a pillar, and I would like to share, even though he's humble, a Gadol Hador, one of the greats of our generation. Through his humor, through his scholarship, through being a mentor, a friend to all, he has compassion, he has love, and he shares his Torah with all of us in a way that we never forget and that we always hold on to, that leads us on our path, fostering our own Jewish identity and connections. Throughout the weekend, there have been brochures about the books that Rabbi Artson has written. You see them outside, his articles, his position as Dean of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies at the American Jewish University. He is a rabbi to people throughout the world. Under Rabbi Artson's leadership, a new rabbinical school has been opened now in Germany, in Europe, and he has and fosters connections, including, of course, with Rabbi Gershom Sizomu and the Abu Yadaya tribe in Uganda. Rabbi Artson spreads his Torah, as I'm mindful, Rabbi Brad, of the quote in the Torah, Ufaratzta Yama Vakedmat Safona V'Negba. And it's your Torah that certainly spreads in so many different directions. Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for being my teacher and my friend. It's my pleasure to welcome, for a final time this weekend, Rabbi Bradley Shilly Artson.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure, really, to have been here with you this weekend, and I look forward to having time for some conversation at the end of this talk as well. The subject that I wanted to speak about today is one that, on one level, shouldn't have to be addressed ever. That you can't be a religious person if your religion doesn't make you a more ethical person. And that even if your theological statements are literally true, if they don't result in greater compassion, in greater attention to human dignity, in caring for those who are marginalized and outcast, then there's a fatal flaw in your religion. Now, that, I think, is the quintessential essence of Jewish teaching. And that makes it hard to talk about. It's kind of like giving a talk in defense of motherhood. You know, it's so obvious that there's everything to say and therefore nothing to say. But nonetheless, we live in an age in which religions so often stand in opposition to human dignity and to humane considerations, that somebody needs to articulate what I think from a Jewish perspective is obvious. And so I want to say it one more time, and then I want to start giving you different examples of it, and then I want to make a broader case. What I want to say is, you cannot be a ben or bat Torah, you cannot be a disciple of Torah if you are not passionate about justice and inclusion. Got that? You cannot be a ben or bat Torah if you are not passionate about justice and inclusion. I don't care how tightly you wrap your tefillin. I don't care how loudly you shout about some local cause, some recent cause. I don't care how much Gemara has gone through you. If somehow that doesn't translate into seeing the humanity of the people in front of you and making their suffering your agenda, then you have missed the entire point of the tradition. Let me start with one of my favorite for instances. There's a man who once was possibly the most famous rabbi of his generation, a man named Simcha Zissel Ziv, who was one of the prominent Orthodox rabbis of the late 1800s. He set up a chain of yeshivot in Central and Eastern Europe that at its height had a couple 100,000 students. So much for rabbinic fame, by the way. And he wrote a book to make the following argument. He made the case that the entire point of the Torah is to prepare you to fulfill the mitzvah that when you see the donkey of your enemy falling under a burden, it's your obligation to help it get up again. Got that? The Torah does command such a thing. If you see the beast of burden of your enemy stumbling, it's your job to go help the animal and help your enemy. And he said, every other commandment in the Torah is simply there to prepare us for that one. Isn't that a remarkable definition of Judaism? Right? So kashrut, Shabbat, Torah study, the holidays, prayer 3 times a day, all of that is simply to get you ready so that when you walk outside and you see someone who you detest, someone who has made your life miserable, when you see them stumbling under a burden, you don't hesitate to know it's your job to help them. Now that sounds so unrealistic, doesn't it? What a crazy thing. A world in which anyone struggling under a burden becomes our job as Jews. Can you imagine what a world it would be if we treated each other like that? If all of us saw the whole point of religion as being to prepare us to lift each other's burdens. I'd sign up to live in that world. Wouldn't you? Okay. Example number 2. I have mentioned this weekend that I have a son who is pretty severely autistic. Jacob is a great human being. I'm happy to let you know that today he is having a date with the lovely Lexi, who is also autistic and gorgeous and wonderful. So he asked me for you to not pity him. If anything, you're the people who should be pitied because you're not with Lexi today. Nonetheless, Jacob has wrestled with pretty severe autism since he was an infant. And we have gone from synagogue to synagogue and Jewish institution to Jewish institution, because here's what most synagogues do with autistic kids. At some point they say to the parents, you know, we would love to be able to include Jacob, but we don't really have the capacity to handle him. So we need you to take him somewhere else. I'll translate that into simple English for you. What that really says, the script, the text underneath the person is, we think your son won't provide a good return on the investment. We think your son is human garbage. That's what it really says. In addition to which, that's not just from the top down, from the bottom up, what we get is we take Jacob to synagogue and he makes noise during the service. And every time he makes a noise, some self-appointed defender of the faith turns around and glares at us as if we're doing it on purpose, as if we like disrupting the service or making noise when you're not supposed to make noise, as if that's something that's a choice. I will tell you the worst of those moments. I was in Israel, the 3rd year of the Ziegler School. All of the students go to Jerusalem for a year. You can't learn to love Israel without being in Israel. So they're all in Israel, and I'm there with them. I make sure that they're all tucked in at night. I make sure that they're all okay. I put a little piece of chocolate by their bed. You know, we are a full-service rabbinical school. I'm sure Fogave did that for you too. Well, I'm in Israel, and the phone rings, and smoke is billowing out of the phone. And I take the phone in my hand gingerly because it's singeing the flesh off of my hand, and my wife is screaming at the top of her lungs. She went to shul with Jacob. Jacob was at the time 10 years old, and she was given an aliyah at the participatory minyan of which they were members. And she brought Jacob up with her because how's he going to learn to have an aliyah for his bar mitzvah if he doesn't practice having an aliyah? So she didn't send him by himself. She went with him. She was going to say the bracha. And when she got up there, the chairman of the ritual committee went up to her and said, "Excuse me, our policy is that no child under bar mitzvah age is allowed to have an aliyah." And she said, "I understand that's the general policy, but Jacob is autistic. He won't learn how to have an aliyah unless he practices having an aliyah." And the ritual chair said, "I'm sorry, that's our policy." Hence the phone call in the middle of the night from my wife, who was distraught. I called up the rabbi of the congregation the next day, and I said, "I need to ask you if it is indeed the policy of the synagogue that my son can't practice having an aliyah on Shabbat." And he said, "No, l'shem chinuch, for the sake of education, we would certainly allow a child with special needs to have an aliyah." Okay, I said, "So here's what I need from you, Rabbi. I need a letter from you that says that. And I'm going to stick it in my talis bag, and I'm going to carry it to shul every week, so the next time some righteous defender of Torah comes into my face, I'm going to hand them your letter and say, this is from the rabbi of the synagogue. And now I need you to call the chair of the ritual committee and tell him that that's the policy." And he said, "Why can't you call him?" And I said, "Because I'm just a pissed off father. You're the rabbi of the synagogue." Okay. Now I want to fast forward that, so eventually we left that synagogue. We left because there were two kinds of people in the synagogue. The nice people in the synagogue said hello to Jacob when they first arrived, and then ignored him for the next 4 hours. The bulk of the congregation skipped step number 1 and went immediately to step number 2. Jacob at some point felt like he was invisible. He would have to look down to see whether the guys could still see his body, because it sure looked like no one could. Eventually he stopped going to shul. Eventually my wife stopped going to shul. And sooner or later I noticed that nobody noticed that my family couldn't attend anymore. At some point, Jacob and I gave a talk that was sponsored by the Federation of Los Angeles for the congregations of LA on special needs inclusion. The two keynote speakers were myself and my son. And after Jacob gave his presentation, I then got up and said, "You would never have a discussion about inclusion of women in the synagogue in which the panel were all men. So long as your conversations about special needs inclusion don't have people with special needs on the panel, you're part of the problem. They don't want your pity, they want to have a say in their future. So I want to offer my son, who will happily speak at your congregation, have him come and he'll talk to you." Okay. There were 50 synagogues there. Do you know how many called up in the following weeks to invite Jacob to come speak? Nope. 1. Ikar, this remarkable, extraordinary community in Los Angeles, whose Rabbi Sharon Brous will be coming to speak to you. You should not miss her talk. She is just an extraordinary human being. So Ikar called and they said, "We'd like Jacob, we're starting a scholar in residence program, we'd like Jacob to be our first scholar in residence." Which he did. And walking out, he typed to my wife, "This place is so amazing, why aren't we coming here?" And she said, "I think we are." I want to share one last Ikar story about this, because this is what success looks like. It's Friday night. During the summer, we meet at Roxbury Park in the community center. We have a picnic outside, and then we meet in the community center for services. And it is an awful room. It's just an ugly, overheated, small, dilapidated room. And Ikar gets a lot of people. So there are 300 young people and me sitting in this room. And Jacob's trying his best to stay in there. And the music is really loud and very energetic. There's no instrument playing, but the energy and the music is pumping in your chest. And Jacob sits for as long as he can, and when we get to the silent Amidah, he doesn't have anything left. He has to leave the room. So he stands up as the room goes silent. He turns to me, and in a loud voice, he says, "I'll be right back." Then he covers his ears with his hands, and he doesn't walk out the door right here. He starts cutting through the crowd to go out the door there, the whole time saying at the top of his lungs, "I'll be right back, I'll be right back, I'll be right back." I get a knot in my stomach, and I wait for the look. And people start to turn towards us, but they're all smiling. I don't know what to do with that. Then someone taps me on the shoulder, and I think, okay, here it comes. And she says to me, "Rabbi Artson, I just want you to know that every time I watch the way your son loves Shabbat, he reminds me how I'm supposed to feel about Shabbat too." And I started to cry, and I said to Alana, "We're home." The Torah's commitment to justice is not a particular policy agenda. This isn't smuggling in the agenda of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party. These are broad principles of inclusion that good people can differ about how to achieve. But what Jews cannot differ on what Jews cannot differ on is the broad value. The value that everyone is welcome as they are. Think about how much energy we spend trying to make ourselves acceptable by someone else's criteria. We tailor our looks, we tailor our clothing, we tailor the things we will or won't say, the things we do or don't do, because we're desperate to be approved. It's exhausting to have to fight so hard to fake it for the sake of approval. And part of what I think the Torah invites us to is a world of come as you are. A world in which every one of us are welcome in the entirety of who we are. And our job is not to tailor someone into another version of ourselves, but to welcome them into that gathering. So now here I want to start again, and I want to tell you what the Torah's purpose is. The Torah tells us two great stories. The first of the great stories is about a God who is so determined to show love that God has to create everything in order for there to be someone to receive the love. You can't be a loving God if nothing else exists. So for God to be loving, God has to create the universe. And God has to create creatures capable of receiving the love, which is to say, creatures who are in that regard like God. We are, we're told, made in God's image. We are most like God when we are freely bestowing our love without expectation. And when we don't do that, when we ration the love that we give, or we withhold the love that we give, we are in fact erasing the divine image within us. That's story number one. Story number two. The book of Exodus tells us that the God of Israel always, always, always sides with the outcast slaves, the people who the community feels are abominations, and always, always, always works to bring pharaohs down. That's the entire book of Exodus. Right? This outcast, marginal people who have been enslaved by the Egyptians, who they describe as toevot, as abominations, the God of Israel goes down and says, I will set you free. And that means that the core of the Torah is you are most like God when you are giving your love away freely, and you are most like God when you are working to liberate the outcast and the despised. I don't know if the Exodus ever happened as a matter of history, but here's what I do know. I do know that we live in a world that bends towards freedom, and that for the last 3,000 years, liberty has spoken in Hebrew, and that the people who are the despots of humanity, the tyrants, the fascists, the communists, have correctly identified the Jews as their enemies, not because of us, but because of what we carry into the world. We carry the story of liberation that African American slaves sang their way into freedom in the Underground Railroad with. We are the ones who gave the world the notion of a day off. The Torah commands us that you must pay the laborer on the day that he labors. The idea of justice for workers, the idea that you live in harmony with the earth and that every 7 years you let the land lie fallow, that's in our Torah. The Torah's vision of justice is so profound that you can't understand the God who gives us Torah if it is not rooted in a profound expression of love. Justice is the implementation of love to strangers. And you cannot be a Torah-observant Jew if you are not concerned about acts of justice, paying people on time, treating children in such a way that they are capable of honoring their parents, providing an education for all children, letting your fields lie fallow at a routine level, compassion for animals, Tsar Balei Chaim is another Torah value. We have accepted a weird propaganda distortion in which when Jews say religious Jew, they mean someone who won't eat in your home. Got that? Nobody else does that. When a Christian says I'm a religious Christian, they mean I pray a lot and I read the Bible a lot. But when a Jew says I'm very religious, it's right before they tell you why they're not going to be at your birthday party. There's something perverse about that because that's not the religion of the Torah. It's not even the religion of the Talmud. The Talmud is a book of great debate, great argument, great conversations, and tells us that our business is the repair of the world. One of my favorite midrashim, rabbinic legends, asks the question, why does the Torah begin with the letter Bet? You all know that the Torah starts with the second letter of the alphabet, Bet, Bereshit, in the beginning. Why with the letter Bet? And the answer is given because the Bet is a letter that is closed at the top, closed behind, closed at the bottom. It's only open going forward. And so the lesson for us is don't waste your energy with abstract metaphysical speculation. Don't waste your time thinking about how did the universe come to be as if that's your business, or where am I going to go when I die. Your job is to take the next step forward, to live your life fully and to help other people do the same. And if you occupy yourself with that, God will take care of the other three directions. That's not your job description. Now, another challenge, and then I'm going to stop soon. Another challenge is that in contemporary American discourse, we have become so politicized and in such a partisan way that we have ripped social justice out of its context. So that in America, when you say the word social justice, you're already saying something that's politically loaded. But that is not the case in the Torah. The Torah talks about a raucous, diverse community, all of which are committed to implementing a way of life that makes us more awake, more connected, more relational than we would be otherwise. So here's where I want to close. Some of you may remember Yom Kippur. It didn't happen that long ago, and frankly, it's coming up sooner than you think. My favorite haftarah, my favorite prophetic reading of the year, is the reading for Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day of the Jewish year that has more ritual commandments than any other day of the year. Many of us spend the entire day in the synagogue. We don't bother leaving. What's the point? By the time you get home, the services will have started again. You might as well just stay put. Right? So it's my practice to get to the synagogue at 8:30 in the morning on Yom Kippur morning, and I stay there until we blow that final shofar blow. Endless attention to ritual. You blow it this way, then you blow it this way, you wear these kind of ritual clothing and not that kind of ritual clothes, you don't wear leather, you don't wear jewelry, you don't put on makeup, on and on and on. And then this Torah reading and that Torah reading and this prophetic reading, endless, endless, endless ritual. And the thing that the rabbis chose to be read to us on that day are the words of the prophet Isaiah. Is this the fast that I desire? That you should break your bodies? That you should do without food? No, says the Lord God of Israel. This is what I desire. That you should feed the hungry. That you should clothe the naked. And that anyone who does these things, the prophet tells us, their light will shine forth more radiant than the sun at its height. On Yom Kippur, the rabbis chose that for us to read. Right? They chose that because on the day that you might feel most smug, oh, I am such a good Jew, look at all the rituals I'm doing, that's the day you need to hear from the very heart of our tradition, if this doesn't translate into lifting the burden of your fellow human beings, then what you have done is not only negligible in God's sight, it is despicable in God's sight. If you can be exposed to this much Torah, and it doesn't make you a more passionate human being about alleviating suffering, about educating ignorance, about eliminating starvation, then you have missed the point and you have perverted the Torah. Strong words, aren't they? One thing we know about Isaiah was that he never got a lifetime contract. But 2,600 years later, we still need to read his words. And we need to remember that a religious Jew is a person who feels the pain of another suffering soul as their agenda. You got that? A religious Jew is a human being who cannot step over a beggar on the way to a restaurant without saying, what does this person's hunger demand of me now? Someone who does not read the newspaper as though it is a sports column, but rather it's to wake up and say, what must I be engaged in today? How does the world's healing depend on me this morning? If I leave you with nothing else, I want to leave you with the Jewish recognition that human dignity, issues of how we include people with special needs, people who have physical challenges that some of us don't have, people who are struggling with mental illnesses, people who are struggling with loved ones who suffer, is no less an issue of social justice than issues of poverty and education and security and defense. And that in all of these matters, we Jews are summoned to stand at the foot of the mountain in a state of purity, in a state of readiness, in a state of naaseh v'nishma. We're ready to do something. Tell us what you need. Thank you very much.
So we have, we'll take maybe 15 minutes for some questions. So we'll have the microphone come around, and Rabbi Artson is really an advocate for hearing what you want to say. I usually don't like to start off with questions, but while your mind is thinking, I'll ask the first, and then I will be quiet, and then we'll invite everybody else. So Rabbi Artson, my question is, and I will share with you that in our congregation here on Yom Kippur, I, as the rabbi, pick an alternative Torah reading Machzor Chadash that we use, and not the traditional Torah reading of Leviticus chapter 18, which discusses forbidden relationships in the afternoon, in Mincha, about homosexuality. This year I talked about that, and a member of the congregation here chose now to leave the synagogue because I don't believe that the Torah is written directly by God, and furthermore that I have an issue with... Actually, it's switched. I should on the left. You should be on the right. There we go. Divinely inspired conservative form. So my question to you is, if Isaiah talks about the mission of taking care of those individuals, how do we wrestle with the rabbinic dictum of the reading on Yom Kippur Mincha, that if a man lies with a man, it is an abomination to God? I know where you stand on this issue. I know where I stand on this issue, and this congregation knows where I stand on this issue. I'm wondering if you could perhaps shed some light on that struggle and that disconnect between the two.
Sure. So, just to make sure everyone remembers, the traditional reading on the afternoon of Yom Kippur is a list of all the sexual practices that are forbidden, among them male sex. So, and a couple thoughts. The first is, if any of you are like me, by the time Yom Kippur Mincha comes around, the really dangerous temptation is not sexual. If a naked supermodel walked up on the bima carrying a Starbucks venti cappuccino, I wouldn't see her at all. So look, I think the rabbis picked that reading not because of the prohibition of male-male sex. 99% of what that talks about are heterosexually prohibited sexual acts, and that's why they included it there, because they want to tell you that if you go through this elaborate Yom Kippur ritual and then you don't honor the sanctity of your monogamous commitment, then you just wasted a day. Right? That's really the point. I don't think it really occurred to them that there were a lot of gay people in the audience and that they needed to be warned. But nowadays, given our changing ethos, the one that hits us in the face is that only because there's nowhere where the Torah tells gay people what would be permissible. Right? It's different. All the heterosexual prohibitions, there is a way for heterosexual people to have licit sex. Right? So the challenge is there's nowhere in the Torah that it tells two gay men what they could do to make their relationship permissible. That was left to our generation to come up with. So personally, I think there are only two available options in a compassionate contemporary synagogue. If you're going to stick with the Levitical reading of the sexual prohibitions, then you have to talk about it beforehand. And you have to talk about what we mean by it, and I would include in that talking about the way different conservative legal authorities have made a path for permissible gay commitments. Or you could do what you've chosen to do, which is frankly what I would do if I had my own synagogue, which is my absolutely favorite passage in the entire Torah is the Kodashim, the holiness codes. Right? If you think, those of you who look at topographical maps, the maps that show you how a mountain is high and a valley is low. If you think about the Torah as a topographical map, the peak of the mountain of Torah is Leviticus. And the peak of the mountain of Leviticus is the holiness code. The Torah is set up in such a way for us to say this chapter in the middle of Leviticus is the high water mark of Torah. So I think what you're doing is actually consistent with the values of the Torah itself. And I commend that practice because I think in our age it's so toxic that no matter what you say, for someone to come to the synagogue and to hear that either they or their brother or their son or their nephew is committing an abomination simply by loving somebody, that is good enough reason to walk out of the synagogue and never come back. So I think that in this case, for the next 100 years at least, changing the Torah reading on Yom Kippur Mincha is a traditional act of loyalty.
Anybody else have a question?
Good morning, my name is Freddie Brown. Rabbi, first of all, thank you for this unbelievable weekend. I'm a very proud member of Hadassah, and recently our organization did a survey of 1,600 people, 800 members of Hadassah, 800 non-members of Hadassah. And one of the issues that came up was that in the younger generation, younger being 20s, 30-year-olds, both members and non-members, their number one issue in their own lives was social injustice. My question to you is, if that's the number one issue, then why is there such a disconnect between the Pew study results and all of that, the disconnect between that generation and their own need for social, to rectify social injustice?
I'm going to try to paraphrase it because I need to make sure I'm answering the question you just asked. If people's number one concern in their 20s and 30s is social justice,
Injustice.
well, I understand.
Yeah.
But what they want is social justice.
Yes.
I suppose there are a fair number of Jews in their 20s and 30s who want social injustice too. But they all have MBAs and they're doing fine. There's that class warfare again. Then why are those people so alienated from Judaism and Jewish community? Well, you've answered the question yourself. When we give people a Jewish education, how much time do we spend on the Hebrew alphabet and how much time do we spend on social justice? And when we talk about Jewish literacy, do we teach them texts about the holidays or we teach them texts about social justice? Right? You could create an amazing curriculum at every level, adult and child, in which people learn Hebrew by studying texts about social justice and then do something about it. So I will tell you again, bragging about my community, which I can brag about because I'm just a layperson there. I didn't create this program. There is a teen Beit Midrash at Ikar where the kids gather once a week on Shabbat and they study rabbinic texts about social justice. And then once a year they do a field trip with Habitat for Humanity or with World Watch or some other social justice organization in which they spend a long weekend with their hands doing the work of social justice. Now, they can learn rabbinic texts. They learn what the Talmud is. They learn what the Mishnah is. They study Mishnaic Hebrew. They do all those things, but the texts are addressing their existential concern. I don't know about you, but my religious education was every single year we studied the same holidays again and again and again, and somehow by Bar Mitzvah year, I still couldn't remember the difference between Sukkot and Shavuot. What kind of a stupid religion names two holidays with the same first letters and last letters? If they had used that time instead of endlessly drilling us about these holidays, which we frankly didn't observe anyway, if instead of hawking us about the calendar, they had talked about the deep ways that Judaism creates better human beings and mandates creating a better world, then maybe those young people would pay attention. But if given a choice between fighting for social justice and spiritual awakeness, or cultural literacy on the other hand, any sane person will opt for social justice and spiritual awakeness, right? So we need to take that back to our educational systems. We need to ask ourselves, what can we do so that what we're teaching people are the places where their lives and Judaism intersect. I'll give you one last for instance. In the rabbinical school, I teach a course that all seniors are required to take. And the course is about applying the Torah to contemporary social issues. So our first session of class, I asked the students who are going to be rabbis in another 4 months, I say to them, what keeps you awake at night? And what keeps Jews who are real people, not rabbis, but real people awake? Right? And they start off with these weird rabbinic concerns. You know, Hebrew literacy is down, and Jews aren't marrying Jews enough. And I said, that's very nice. How about your siblings who aren't going to rabbinical school? Do they lie awake worrying about those things? No. So why don't you share with me what they lie awake at night about? And then they come up with real issues. Right? Why is it so hard to meet somebody? Why is it so hard to stay in a committed relationship? Why is it so hard to have a sense of balance in my life? I feel like I'm drowning in work. Why is it so hard to have meaningful work? Why are we trashing the planet the way we're trashing the planet? Why does it feel like we've been in an endless war for the last 40 years and there doesn't seem to be anything to show for it? On and on and on. There's lots of things keeping people awake. Good, I say. Now, Jews are going to come to you because they think that the Torah tradition has some wisdom, not to give them the answers, but to help them wrestle with the question. So every one of my seniors has to come up with an hour-long class and a study sheet addressing a social contemporary concern, mobilizing Jewish tradition to help create a real conversation about those issues. I hope that those rabbis will go out in the world, like your rabbi, and be able to present a Torah that lives in the real world, not just in the imagination of a scholar.
Thank you, Rabbi Artson. It's been a fabulous weekend, so I really want to thank you for being here. My question is, what does, I'm Hamalan. My question is, now that you are articulating what our educational system should look like, where do we go to our leadership, not just in our synagogue, but in the country as a whole, in the Jewish leadership, to create that kind of educational model? And who's working on it? Is there something?
Who's not working on it? Right? Everybody knows that we need to attend to the way we educate the next generation. There are fabulous textbooks available. Behrman House has wonderful books. Torah Ora has wonderful books. We at the Ziegler School put out a series called Walking With, which is free and it's available online. If you go to zieglertorah.org, you can download PDFs that have lessons. We have a book called Walking with God, Walking with Mitzvot, Walking with History, Walking with Social Justice, Walking with Prayer. Right? And these books each have 12 chapters with essays for adults and worksheets that can be done by intelligent kids and adults, in which they're exposed to primary texts and then they think about them in terms of issues in their own lives. There's lots that can be done and lots of resources to be had to do it. So I don't think the challenge is finding allies or assistants in doing it. I think the challenge is coming up with the will to do something unprecedented. Right? And then once you get it right, then everyone else can copy you.
Thank you.
Hi, Rabbi. I agree. It's been wonderful hearing you speak. I'm Mary Shapiro. I was born and raised Catholic, and I'm a convert to Judaism. I have several Jewish friends who don't believe in God, or certainly aren't sure there is a God, and many also who don't believe in an afterlife. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Okay. My thoughts on Jews who don't believe in God and an afterlife. Most of those are my relatives. So I have two things to say. I have the privilege of supervising the country's largest conversion program. The Miller Introduction to Judaism program at AJU converts about 300 people a year. And when I was a pulpit rabbi, I was a congregational rabbi for 10 years, that 10-year period that my mother refers to as when you were a rabbi. I ran an Introduction to Judaism program, and in the 10 years I was there, we converted 200 people, of whom 10 have gone on to the rabbinate. So I just want to say up front, I'm not part of the demographic problem. You guys aren't carrying your weight. And here's what I would always say to the people who converted through my program. You guys are going to save the Jewish people. Because the Jewish people have been so burned by the last 2,000 years that they have become alienated from their own source. Jews, when you talk about God's love, think you sound Christian. And I keep saying, where do you think that concept comes from? That's from our Torah, right? That's where Jesus got it. He got it from our Torah and our prophets. So the people who are able to see Judaism fresh, who aren't clouded over by 2,000 years of persecution and 10 years of awful Hebrew school, are the non-Jews who come to Judaism because they see this tradition and they see how wonderful it is and how wise it is and how powerful it is. So I want to encourage you to share the good news, right? Because there are a lot of jaded Jews who don't know that they're wounded. And they don't know that they're missing out on something amazing. I can't tell you the number of my rabbinical students who grew up in fairly assimilated Jewish homes thinking that Judaism was bland and uninteresting and unengaging, and then they went to an ashram, right, or a Zen center, or a yoga studio, and they got seriously involved in Hindu or Buddhist or Zen practice, and then they walked back to their big, boring suburban synagogue, opened up the Mopser and said, oh my God, someone has smuggled all the spirituality into the place no one would think to look. It's in the prayer book. Right? So our job, all of us, is to return a lost object. The Jewish people have misplaced their spirituality and their heritage. But I want to tell you, and I say this as a woman who has been a rabbi a long time, preaching is the least effective way to do that. Right? So you can't give Jews sermons, they'll shut off. What you have to do is show them that you live by your faith. And that it's your love of God and your capacity to put your trust in God's promises that lets you get up and be a magnificent human being. And as they see you do that, and they see you give the glory to God, then they will learn that it's safe to do the same. I do just want to say, in the interest of Title VII, that men are also allowed to ask questions. I had thought this was an egalitarian community, and little did I know that it had been kidnapped by radical feminists.
So, I'm Carol. I'm radical a long time because my office used to be at HA.
I can't hear.
Okay. So, I'm very familiar with car from the years that we lived in Los Angeles. And one of the things that I've always heard about car is people will say, oh yes, wonderful congregation. It's not affiliated with any movements. I have a daughter in Denver who is the associate director of an organization called Judaism Your Way, and she is a rabbinical student in the Olive program, which is the Jewish renewal. And then I have another daughter in Brooklyn who is involved with group of parents in the day school starting an independent mini. And here we are at Or Chadash, proud, affiliated conservative Jews. So what can we do as proud, affiliated conservative Jews to help these kinds of congregations and minyanim take hold, even though they are not necessarily conservative affiliated?
I will say something that you probably don't expect to hear from the dean of one of the two conservative centers in North America. But given that I've been here all weekend, this will be the first thing I've said that you didn't expect to come out of a rabbi's mouth. I could care less whether a community affiliates or not. There are two different kinds of conservative Judaism. There's the conservative Judaism of the bureaucracy, about which I don't give a damn, and I tell you on behalf of the one in whose labor I work, that God doesn't care either. And then there's the conservative Judaism that is a cluster of ideas. The idea that the Torah is a robust repository of God and Jews meeting together, that the tradition contains great wisdom for how to live a better life, that a life of mitzvot is a rich and fulfilling way to connect to humanity, the globe, and Jewish values, that Judaism has to be normative, that is to say, halacha has to be at its core, that Torah is an ongoing and living tradition, which means that you cannot practice it the way they did 200 years ago. You have to practice it the way we practice it now. And we need to be open to contemporary wisdom and find ways to integrate that into Jewish life. If all of, and I guess Jewish peoplehood and Hebrew language and the state of Israel is another cluster of values I'd throw in the hopper too. If all of those values are the values that created conservative Judaism, then the fact that we no longer have a monopoly on them is an example of our triumph. And we should own it as a triumph. It may be a bureaucratic challenge, but it's a triumph. So let me be clear about that. I go to ICAR. ICAR is a non-affiliated movement in which the rabbis come from JTS and the Ziegler School. The interns all come from the Ziegler School. The Chumash that they use is the Liber Chumash, the red Chumash that you use here. The Sidur that they use is Sim Shalom. It is an egalitarian halachic community. You tell me, is that conservative or is it not? I know they don't pay dues to United Synagogue, but it sure seems conservative to me. The fact that the Reform movement is more open to Hebrew, more open to traditional observance, more open to there being norms of Jewish life than it was when I grew up in it, that the rabbis now wear kippot, that many of them use tefillin, is that a defeat for conservative Judaism or a triumph? I'd like to say it's a triumph, although it is an institutional challenge. The fact that you have a rabbinical school in New York that brags about open orthodoxy and produces wonderful young male rabbis who preach a kind of openness that one doesn't hear in other segments of the Orthodox world, and who have both a modern Western education and a solid traditional education. Is that a defeat of conservative Judaism, or is that yet another triumph of conservative Judaism? The fact that in YU, they're now talking about creating a document in the Ketubah that provides so that the husband has to give a divorce, a get to his wife, which, by the way, we came up with 50 years ago, and they at the time wrote about what a Shabbat is that a defeat or a triumph? It is institutionally a challenge, and at its core, it is a victory. So I would say the best thing we can do for the Jewish world is to stop worrying about turf and start worrying about substance. Let's become a dynamic center of Torah learning and Jewish observance. And if you become a place where people see Jews who grow in mitzvot, grow in Torah study, grow in faith, and live their faith out in the world, you will attract people to you, whether they join or not. Whether they switch their label or not, you will be a source of strength and encouragement for them. That's where the struggle is. Because let me be quite clear. The one part of the PU study that came out that I think is of value is that the fastest growing group in Jewish life today is none of the above. And because the fastest growing segment is none of the above, it means we can no longer afford our denominational squabbles. In the light of the latest data, and the latest data is 20 years of consistent data, we have to be each other's allies. So he wants to daven behind a mechitza and I don't, becomes trivial because the alternative is not the mechitza people win or the non-mechitza people win. The people who are going to win are the ones who are in the shopping mall on Saturday morning instead of in shul at all. So if we want this tradition to live, we had better recognize as allies everyone who loves Torah however they love it, everyone who loves mitzvot however they love it, everyone who loves the Jewish people, which is a stretch, however they love it. Right? And we need to reach out to say to them, how can I help you be you? Not how can I make you into me? How can I help you be you? So that you're more effective, you're more fulfilled, and you can reach out better.
So this is Rabbi Artson, this is my Israel travel buddy this summer. He'll introduce himself and also a Ramah kid. So tell everyone what your name is and then ask Rabbi Artson your question.
I'm Brian, and you know how the Jews are like the chosen people, and the Jews technically just agreed because God threatened to drop a mountain on their heads. Plus they were their last. For one thing, they were their last hope, so they weren't even God's first pick. So how are we the chosen people? That just doesn't make sense.
Great question. So the first thing I want to say to you is if the Holy One threatens to drop a mountain on your head, you should also develop a spontaneous theological interest in whatever he's offering. We have a word for that, we call it seichel. Second of all, you are not the first Jew to ask that question. In fact, the rabbis of the Talmud say any agreement to enter into a relationship has to be voluntary. Both parties have to want it. So if we accepted the Torah only because God threatened to bury us, then the Torah is no longer binding on us. So they answered the question by saying, so at what moment did we really enter into a relationship with God? It turns out it wasn't at Sinai at all. It was recorded in the book of Esther, where it says, Kiblu v'kibnu, the Jews wrote and accepted the Torah voluntarily. That's why we do Torah. Right? And in our time, nobody can force you to live Torah. You have to choose it yourself voluntarily. So we are all of us Jews by choice right now. Second thing I want to say is when I talk about the Jews as being chosen, I don't think that means that we're the only chosen people. In fact, I think everybody is a chosen person and every group is chosen. The question is, what are they chosen for? If you come home from school and you say to your mom, hey mom, I was chosen in school today, what's she going to say back? Chosen for what? Right? So that's the question I want to ask you. When you say the Jews are chosen, the question I want to ask you is, chosen for what? And I think what we are uniquely chosen for is to live lives in which we translate the Torah from a book into a way of living that makes us live better lives. But other people are chosen for other things, and we need to honor that, and we need to learn from their chosenness just as they can learn from ours. It does not mean that Jews are better than other people. It just means that we have our own special gift to bring to the world. Okay?
So we have time maybe for, say, 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up so people can have some private time. If there are no more questions, we can wrap up now. And yes, Alan, maybe the president of the congregation will have the last question. Oh, okay.
Mine is not a question. I'm just saying, I said it at shul yesterday morning, and when the rabbi first approached the board and talked about wanting to bring Rabbi Artson to our community as a scholar resident, I did not know who Rabbi Artson was. I had never read anything he wrote, and heard anything he said. I didn't know anything about him. But the rabbi said, trust me, this guy is something special. And let me tell you, Rabbi Artson exceeded everything you told me about him.
Thank you very much.
So I didn't say a lot. So you say you'll be impressed. He did say he's one of the 50 top rabbis in the country or something like that. I'd put him among the top 5. But I just can't thank you enough for coming. I can't thank Frank and Stephanie enough for the work you've done. I can't thank enough your committee for everything you've done. And most of all, I can't thank all of you for being donors and for coming here. And is there a way we can sign a contract to get you back here next week? Incredible weekend when I saw the program Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Saturday night, Sunday morning. I said, people are going to get burnt out. But let me tell you, I'm ready for another month of this. Thank you very much, Rabbi Shuli, for co-sponsoring it. And, as most of you should be aware of Valley Beth Midrash and the unbelievable work they've done, and Stan Hammond is the president, chairman, whatever it is, of Valley Beth Midrash. It's a terrific thing. So thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi Kaplan, for introducing us to Rabbi Artson.
Pleasure. Thank you. Just a reminder for our congregation, people otherwise in the community who are here, I just want to make 2 quick comments. There are a lot of different things coming up in our congregation. Our Purim celebration, that information will be revealed coming up this week, so stay tuned for the bulletin for our theme. Mishloach Manot are being sold, and we have some forms there. The deadline is Tuesday. So we have those forms. There are also books marked. We still have a few books for sale. And Rabbi Artson will be available to sign those books before you depart. And lastly, just to all of you, again, it has been a remarkable weekend of learning, of taking Rabbi Artson's Torah, and now it will be up to us to spread that Torah within our community and beyond. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.